Alrighty, y'all. Hello, and welcome back to what should be a very interesting video, Inventions. These are always interesting because a lot of times it's something that changed the world and could be something that we interact with every day or at least very often, if not every day. Now, this is from somewhere we haven't covered when it deals with inventions. This is inventions you didn't know were Polish. What inventions have come out of Poland? Let's take a look. Of course, this won't be all of them, but at least a good start. These couple videos will be linked in the description, so you can watch the whole things uninterrupted and browse our channels. Let's get into it.
In this video, we're shedding the limelight on the top 10 inventions made by Poles, at home and abroad.
All right, let's do it.
Number 10.
These are always fascinating.
Walkie-talkie. Born in Warsaw in 1909, Henryk Magnuski worked as a radio repairman for the Polish military, and he eventually ended up in Chicago. Surprise, surprise.
Yes, lots of Polish people still in influence, and you can see it in Chicago. I'm near Chicago, so fun fact. That's very cool.
It was here that he would be employed by the Galvin Manufacturing Company, which would later change its name to Motorola. Leading a team of radio engineers, they developed the SCR 300, the first radio to be used by American forces in Europe. This revolutionary mobile device became known amongst GIs as the walkie-talkie.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you can find the walkie-talkie in just about any line of work. Take this part-time construction worker, for example, overseeing Magnuski's head.
Yeah, damn, I have not seen construction workers quite like that near me, but that would be interesting. Walkie-talkies are a big deal, and I did not realize, I guess they've been around since literally 100 plus years ago. That's pretty cool. Good job.
Number 9.
Good job, Poland.
Esperanto. Imagine a world where there is one neutral language that everyone can communicate in. A language of understanding and diplomacy that has the power to end international conflicts and foster world peace. That was the dream of a linguist from Białystok by the name of L.L. Zamenhof. While studying in Warsaw as a young man, he began to develop Esperanto, largely based on his knowledge of the Romance, Germanic and Slavic language groups, but with a much simpler grammatical structure that could be easily learned. A simple language invented by a Pole. Who'd have thought?
Yeah, that's pretty funny. That's pretty funny because Polish, I'm sure you've heard this. You've probably heard it from me before. I'll say it again. I have the utmost fascination and respect for anyone that speaks Polish on a daily basis. I, for one, actually do love it. I think it sounds great. But boy, oh boy, is it intimidating. It does not look easy at all. And I've looked at only 1 or 2 videos about Polish, the basics of it and how some of the words work. Wow, does that make my head spin as an English speaker and, of course, an American?
After more than 30 years of development and several books published, the first World Esperanto Conference was held in 1905. Since then, the movement of Esperantists has continued to grow, and today there are an estimated 63,000 to 2 million speakers of Esperanto.
Real. I've never heard of it.
The kerosene lamp. The story of the kerosene lamp can be traced back to the present-day Ukrainian city of Lviv, which used to be Lwów, Poland.
Wow,
it was here in 1853 that 2 Polish chemists, Jan Zek and Ignacy Łukasiewicz, attempted to distill alcohol from oil, which at the time was an incredibly cheap resource being extracted in the region. Though they failed to make anything potable, at least not to any self-respecting spirit connoisseur, what they did discover was a clear flammable liquid that burned long and bright, and more importantly, it didn't stink like oil. Putting the liquid called kerosene to work, they asked a local tinsmith to make a lamp with a small tank at the bottom. Thus, the classic shape of the kerosene lamp had been born. Number 7.
Cool.
A railway signal device. Jan Józef Baranowski deserves the award for the most proactive employee of all time when it comes.
So far, as you kind of would expect, but it's still fascinating. These are all very world-changing, very important inventions, with the exception of that language. Now, that language might not have caught on how they might have, or that guy might have originally hoped. But is something I will look into another time. That actually sounds pretty interesting. But these inventions are These are big deals. These are a big deal for sure.
Thanks to his work
Very
for the
impressive.
French railway. Fleeing Poland after the failed November uprising of 1830, Baranovsky first worked as a bank teller and cashier in France, before he landed a job as a bookkeeper for the National Rail Network. Baranovsky made several key inventions for the railway system, including the first ever ticket printing machine that could spit out 5,000 tickets an hour, and each with a unique serial number. But at a time when railroad accidents were becoming more and more frequent, it was Baranovsky's automated railway signalling device, invented in 1857, that made the biggest impact on the industry. Prior to this, signalling depended on employees waving flags at various points along the track.
Oh, I did not know that.
As well as their knowledge
That sounds like a mess.
of when and where the trains were coming from. In an age of increasingly busy railway lines, the Baranovsky signal, as it became known, avoided countless accidents and undoubtedly saved a lot of lives. Number 6.
That one was very important.
Telectroscope. Jan Szczepanik, often referred to as the Polish Edison, made several contributions to technology throughout his lifetime. However, it's his version of the telectroscope, produced in 1898, that is considered to be a landmark in the development of telecommunication. A telectroscope is a scope and lens, amplified with electricity, that can reproduce images from a distance. Sound familiar? You may not be surprised to know that the term telectroscope was replaced around the turn of the century with the word television. Though he was certainly not the first, Szczepanik's weird machine, as it was called, is alleged to have been able to recreate colour, which would make Szczepanik the forefather of colour television. Number 5.
Okay, that is fascinating. You know, looking at old inventions or even inventions that we use today, but looking at the earliest versions of it, sometimes really blows my mind. Like, how did he do this? I'm not even going to try to begin to understand how this exactly works, this older telectroscope. But the fact that it basically led to television is extremely world changing, right? How relevant is television to pretty much, well, literally everyone watching this? You might not be watching this video right now on TV, although according to YouTube, I do get analytics that show that about half of my viewers every month do watch on TV. So yeah, TV is very relevant. And, you know, when you go back to the beginning, I didn't know about this. That's pretty cool.
5. The Paperclip. Whilst the person behind the idea of the mighty paperclip has long been disputed, one contender for your praise may be the famous Polish pianist and composer Józef Hoffman. Praised by many as the greatest pianist that ever lived, Hoffman was also an inventor in his spare time. It's been suggested that the inspiration behind the shape of the paperclip was the treble clef.
Some people are just so accomplished and successful, so busy, right?
No doubt burned into his brain after hours of reading piano scores. Hoffman is also accredited for developing one of the earliest mechanical windscreen wipers.
Damn.
Which apparently was inspired by the back and forth motion of his metronome.
Oh, wow.
Number 4.
Yeah, that guy seems like a decent guy. You know, possibly the best pianist in the world. Tons of, you know, very impactful inventions. You know, just casual stuff. He's all right.
The electric-powered submarine. Although experimentation with submersible craft had existed since the mid-16th century, it was Apollo who first successfully created a submarine powered solely by electricity.
Look at that.
Mechanical engineer Stefan Zhevietsky was taken on by the Navy of the Russian Empire in 1877, and it was here that he made a huge number of developments in submarine technology. The biggest of these came in 1884, when he installed a battery-powered propeller to a one-man submarine that could chug along at a steady 4 knots an hour. While it may sound slightly unimpressive now, this was a major technological advancement at the time.
In 1884, it does sound impressive to me. Yeah, it's pretty slow, but the fact that it moved under its own power, battery power, and we're talking about a sub from the 1880s, and electric? Yeah, that's pretty,
and especially considering the fact that most submarines were still relying on coal power and oars. Outside of submarine technology, Zhevietsky is also the guy who invented the taximeter, of all things. Number 3. The vote counting machine. Oh
Really?
look, it's our friend Baranovsky again.
Damn.
The mid-19th century was a time of renewed interest in liberal democracy, and public voting was taken very seriously. Realising the overwhelming task of counting votes, as well as issues of scrutiny and impartiality, Baranovsky conceived the idea that it would be better for a machine to do all the counting instead.
Yeah.
No doubt his obsession with numbers was the major motivator behind this, and other machines he patented as well include the gas meter.
Wow.
Yes, apparently he invented that as well.
Who knew? I am curious to see in the comments if you knew all of these, and if you did, I mean, more power to you. That's awesome. Also, like always, if there's anything worth mentioning that is not covered here, I would love to know as well. This is a great list so far. This is very, very interesting to me.
Number 2, cotton swabs.
You know what I like is a lot, it's a mix between really big inventions that certainly change the world, and then little things like a paperclip or a cotton swab. Honestly, in a way, equally impactful. A lot of these things people might use on a daily basis or close to it. But of course, a cotton swab and a big machine are two different things. But it's fun. Like, they're equally important in the grand scheme of things. And I think that's fun that those are both covered here.
The cotton swab was developed by Leo Gestanzang, a Pole from Warsaw who made the Chicago move in 1912.
Nice.
The story goes that in 1923, Gestanzang found his wife, Jutta, applying cotton wads to toothpicks in an attempt to reach those hard-to-clean places. This became the inspiration behind the Q-tip, Q standing for quality.
It's so fun to hear the origin story of some things, right? Like, that could have happened to anyone. And that's such a clever but kind of simple thing. Like, hey, I'm going to stick this cotton swab on a toothpick and reach in there and get it. And who knew that this actually works really well? Of course, nowadays you just buy Q-tips, right? But I also never knew what that stood for, so that's kind of cool.
But unlike his wife's toothpick, the Q-tip had 2 cotton tips to allow for double takes. Before we reveal our number 1 pole, you're either Superman or a pole. The first commercially produced bulletproof vest was made by a Polish priest named Kazimierz Zeglen, who travelled to the US in the 19th century. It was here that he came across the research of a George E. Goodfellow, a physician based out in the Wild West. It was Goodfellow that observed how gunshot victims who had silk fabric against their bodies often had reduced injuries when struck by a bullet.
Isn't it just on brand that, one of the U.S. kind of cameos in this video, an appearance of the U.S. is, of course, a bulletproof vest. Now, of course, invented by a Pole, but I'm saying, he had to go to the U.S. to realize, hey, this needs to be a thing because guns have been flying for too long around here. That's very, very fitting and on brand for the
Expanding
U.S.
on his research, Zeglen developed a centimetre-thick vest of layered and woven silk that could stop a bullet altogether. He publicly demonstrated his new invention in 1897. The priest wore the vest, and the assistant fired the bullet. But Zeglen's vest was not a viable product. It was slow to produce. Not to mention the outrageous price tag of $800, which is about $25,000 today.
Wow.
Enter Pole number 2, Jan Szczepanik.
So let me get this straight. Back then, how freaky is that? You invent a bulletproof vest, but to make sure it works as intended, there's really no way to test it other than someone human has to wear it and trust another person to shoot them with a real gun. Like, was there any safety measures there? What if it doesn't work? Right? Oh, man. Just be glad that none of us had to be the test subject for that. Yikes.
I think you've been acquainted. Szczepanik, who had been developing automated weaving technology for years, teamed up with Zeglen and managed to work out the whole mass production thing. The bulletproof vest was a huge success amongst the rich and the famous, who could afford the ridiculous price tag that still remained. Most notably, Szczepanik managed to palm one off to King Alfonso of Spain, and the vest saved his life during an assassination attempt. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is alleged to have been offered a vest, but turned it down. And we all know how that turned out.
Jeez.
Jeglen and Szczepanik eventually had a falling out over business relations, and although Jeglen never relinquished his authorship, it was Szczepanik's weaving production and entrepreneurship that made his profit greater. So much so, in fact, that Jeglen's contributions are all but forgotten today. It's also interesting to note that over 60 years later, it was an American woman of Polish descent, Stephanie Kwolek, that developed the polymer for Kevlar, the fabric which is used in today's standard issue bulletproof vests.
You know, how fascinating that the bulletproof vest was invented in literally multiple steps by multiple Polish people. How bizarre is that? That's a cool fact. All right, and then we have 10 more honorable mentions here. This one will be muted due to copyrighted music, but let's take a look. These are some bonus Polish inventions. We'll see if there's any duplicates as well. Commodore 64 computer. Really? Wow, became the base for Windows, Apple, and IBM. Most sold computer in history. That's crazy. Now, I never had one of these, but they're famous enough to where I've definitely heard of them. That is cool, too. Was this mentioned in the last one? I can't remember. No, I don't think so, actually. Petroleum refinery. Really? That's fascinating, too. Oh, my God. Is that... professional recorders. Audio recorders. Wow. I did not realize, you know, almost all of these. I've never heard the origin of these inventions, and I really didn't know, I guess, or wouldn't have guessed that they were Polish. It's so cool. Okay, here's our first duplicate one. That one is interesting. I definitely got to dive into that at another time. Hydrogen bomb. What? Yeah, the Manhattan Project over here in New Mexico. Jeez, that's crazy, man. Fun fact, where they tested the Manhattan Project, where they tested the original bomb that they lit off, which was in New Mexico. It was set off in White Sands. And for about a year, when I lived in New Mexico, I lived right next to where they did that in southern, south central New Mexico there. So, yeah, I've been in that area. Really, really weird bit of history and fun fact, I guess, about me. Movie projector and handheld camera. Damn, that's a big one. That's a big one for sure. Wow, these are awesome. Lots of big time stuff coming out of Poland, especially having to do with like films, right? Cameras, handheld cameras, TV. The early pinnings of that, right? Computers. Polish technology is top notch. Golf cart. What? Dude, I freaking love golf carts. How relevant are golf carts in Europe or Poland? Are there any, you know, small villages or places where you can drive golf carts other than a golf course? Because that does exist to a minimum extent here in the U.S. in certain places. Or, of course, if you have a big property, you can drive them. I do have a little bit of a decent-sized property behind my house, and I do have an old, cheap, beat-up golf cart, and you know, for personal use. And they're fun. They're cool. So I like golf carts. That's a good one. Thank you. Thank you, Poland. That's cool. Number one, what do we got? Mine detector. Whoa, that's freaky. Mines just freak me out. You know, it's not something you ever want to mess with, but that's a great invention, because if you can have anything that can help you spot those, yeah, I think you'd take it. Wow. Great list overall. That was a solid number of inventions, I think. Great way, you know, great introduction to this from Poland. I would love to see your comments on this. I always learn a lot from viewers. What did you think of that? I am thoroughly impressed. These invention videos are always fun. This one might have impressed me more than a lot of episodes, though. Poland coming out strong with some inventions. Thank you to all the Polish inventors of history. We all benefit greatly from a lot of those. Yeah, I appreciate you watching. I love these. More to come. For sure. My name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker. Until next time, y'all. Catch you later.